Good evening from New York. The U.S. Department of Justice will investigate incidents of torture committed by U.S. officials and contractors during the Bush administration, including threatening people with guns and power drills, with raping their mothers, with killing their children. Our fifth story on the countdown, the White House today flooding the zone. On the same day, a federal judge ordered the release of the CIA documents that read like something out of the Spanish Inquisition. Specifically, federal prosecutor John Durham expanding his existing investigation into CIA destruction of interrogation videotapes to include those interrogations themselves. One administration official telling NBC News tonight Durham will investigate about 10 cases detailed in this new CIA report, such as one in which one person was forced to breathe in cigarette smoke until they had to, quote, purge, like taking accused USS Cole bombing mastermind Abdel Rahim al-Nashiri and stripping him naked except for a hood on his head, racking a pistol close to his head, revving a power drill in violation of U.S. law against threatening to kill detainees, like telling him, quote, we can bring your family in here, we could get your mother in here to rape them in front of him. Like telling accused 9/11 mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, quote, we're going to kill your children. Like mock executions, firing a gun in a cell and letting a detainee next door see a hooded body lying apparently dead on the floor. As well as incidents in the report that remain secret, incidents the administration officials said, quote, raise allegations of abuse that are much worse, presumably including the ones that killed people. As for waterboarding, the report says officials went beyond DOJ guidelines but had, quote, oral concurrence to do so. Quote, the Attorney General acknowledged he is fully aware of the repetitive use of the waterboard. And despite former Vice President Cheney's claim that 2 CIA reports from 2004 and 2005 will vindicate his use of torture, those reports, also released with redactions today, say only that detainees provided information, not that torture was necessary to get it. Mr. Cheney unavailable for comment today, said to be on a boat. But if you think he's up a river or heading for international waters, our Chief Justice correspondent Pete Williams reports that Holder has all but concluded he will not recommend that Mr. Durham investigate the Bush officials who conceived of and authorized CIA torture, even though top Bush Justice Department official Jay Bybee green-lighted death threats shortly before someone pointed a power drill at Mr. al-Nashiri's head. Instead, Mr. Obama today announced the creation of a new task force answering directly to the White House to coordinate and centralize U.S. interrogations of high-value terrorist suspects. Mr. Obama appointing this man to oversee those interrogations, John Brennan, to make sure detainees are not tortured nor renditioned to states that torture. This despite the fact that Brennan ran the Bush CIA Counterterrorism Center while the center developed its torture and rendition regimes which Brennan later defended. Let's turn to Jane Mayer, staff writer at The New Yorker, author of The Dark Side, the inside story of how the war on terror turned into a war on American ideals. Great, thanks for your time tonight. Great to be with you. What did I miss just now?
Well, that was a pretty good rundown on what sounds like really medieval program. You know, one of the things that the Inspector General's report says that I think is important is he told the CIA back in 2004 when his report was given to them that they were in deep legal trouble. And so they were very much forewarned. And I think there were some other documents put out by the Justice Department today that show that they continued to justify this program on through 2007. That is 3 years later. They were still doing many of the same things, or justifying them anyway. So basically, they were warned. They were in legal trouble. And you can see that in this report because it reads like a crime scene, basically.
Yeah, and there was the one quote in there in which someone was saying, you know, we're going to have to answer for this in 10 years. They got everything right but the date. But what about who's answering? Right. Who's answering here? Because every single passage that might lead higher up, identify the source of a torture technique, that has been blacked out, redacted. Do we get that information from Durham's investigation, or do we get that information never?
Well, my guess is that if they actually open some kind of serious investigation, and Durham is said to be a very serious prosecutor, that even if they start at the very bottom, it's going to keep leading up and up through the chain of command. Because if nothing else, if they actually bring charges against anybody at the CIA who was at the bottom of the food chain, the first thing that person's going to do is say, I was authorized, let me tell you what my orders were. So they've begun a process that could lead to the top.
Well, if it works along the Archibald Cox lines, as I analogized last week, where they've supposedly circumscribed it, but as you say, people want to get out from being the scapegoats for the whole operation. I think your assessment is correct. What about Mr. Cheney's assessment that there would be documents that prove that torture worked where traditional and legal interrogation did not or would not? Is there anything in those documents that were released today that supports that contention?
Well, the documents that I've seen, and maybe I'm missing something, but so far I am amazed at how little support there is for the things that Vice President Cheney has been saying. There is nothing but a mass of claims that they got information from this individual and that individual, many from KSM, who apparently has been the greatest font of information for them. But there's absolutely nothing saying that they had to beat them to get this information. In fact, as anybody knows who knows anything about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, he was dying to tell the world when he was interviewed by Al Jazeera before he was in U.S. custody about everything he knew and everything he did. He was proud of his role as the mastermind of 9/11, and he loves to talk about it. So there's no evidence that I see in this that these things were necessary. I spoke to someone at the CIA who was an advisor to them who's conceded to me that we could have gotten the same information with tea and crumpets. So,
yeah, or buying a copy of the Al Jazeera interview. The last note here about this appointment of John Brennan, or the intention to put him in charge of interrogation. Is the lesson of the Bush years ultimately that interrogators should answer directly to the White House via this man, John Brennan?
Well, I mean, it's an irony that John Brennan seems to be at the apex of the interrogation policy in the Obama administration, because many people remember, including me, I interviewed him 2 years ago. He was defending the Bush program. I think he was an internal critic of waterboarding, but beyond that, he told me we've got to do these things. So that intense interrogation techniques were necessary. Now that he's advising Obama, he may have changed his mind. Certainly the task force has taken a position that abuse has to be in the past. We don't need these things. And I guess John Brennan very much is taking that position now, too. Well, hopefully there's no zealot like a convert. Jane Mayer of The New Yorker, also author of The Dark Side. Much thanks, as always, for your time on this. Glad to be with you.
I'm not a crook.